You don't need I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we're going to go over some of the things that have happened in the playoffs. We're going to take a look at my futures bets that have lost, the futures bets that still have a chance of winning, and we'll kind of explore the topic of teams being horrible at drafting. And some of those are going to be, easy conversations where you probably don't have any problems with what I say. And then some other things you might think are just wrong because, you're willing to give teams more of a benefit of the doubt than I am. So good for you. That makes you a good person or something. I don't know. But let's start by going through some of my futures bets and let's just do it. So first up, I had Vitality to win the spring split playoffs. That was $50 to win $350. That lost. I have a huge problem with the way the Vitality drafts. Anybody that watches like every region would probably know that the Jinx Aphelios matchup. Obviously, it's not a solved thing where like everybody agrees on what the best way to go about that draft is. But I remember listening to that Carzy interview after their match against XL, and that is the moment I knew that I was screwed because he was basically saying that he prefers the Aphelios side of that matchup. And yes, it worked well against XL. But guess what? Vitality is just better than XL. And when they were losing games to XL, the only reason, well, not the only reason, but a big reason why those games were so much closer is because drafting the way that they had to around bot lane and Jinx kind of warped what they had to do. So, like, I understand what he's saying. I just disagree. So I posted something on Twitter the other day, actually. Aphelios was 8-3 against Jinx in LPL playoffs, and I think that this is an important qualification. Doggo and Jackie Love were the two players who won that side of the matchup. And you might ask yourself, why does that matter? It matters because different AD carries have different strengths and identities. Doggo, going into Worlds last year, was known as an Aphelios one-trick. Like, the player was obviously very broken all of last year, but that's how he kind of rose to prominence. I think that he was obviously a good AD carry before that, but him on Aphelios, that's like his quintessential champion. That's who he is the best at. That changes things a little bit. So you might, if you're BLG, you might say to yourselves, yes, in a vacuum, the Jinx side of the matchup is maybe a little bit better, because of the range difference. But if we, balance out the range between a different champion on our team and still get the Aphelios side of the matchup, we can still win a high percentage of the time because there's so much comfort for Doggo on Aphelios. And really what that comes down to is the ability for the AD carry to play aggressively and embrace that playmaking upside while not completely losing the laning phase. Which, again, that requires you to be going up against a Jinx that's not as good at punishing the matchup. And then, in the later game team fights, not being completely outranged or not being too far behind. But if you're losing that laning phase very hard because the Jinx has the natural push into Aphelios, then you're into a spot where not only are you on the weaker side of the matchup, but you have less gold because the laning phase was better for Jinx. So that's just kind of the way that I look at that matchup, and that's why I prefer the Jinx side because it controls the lane a little bit better, and it has, in my opinion, the higher upside in team fights and causes more stress on the draft from a range perspective. So if teams are first picking champions or doing their first rotation on red side without taking Jinx into consideration, they're doing it the wrong way. And I really think that an optimal draft is completely centered around Jinx. Jinx is the skeleton key for the draft. right now. You need to have an opinion on Jinx before you can have an opinion on anything else, in my opinion. In the LCK, Jinx was 1-0. Kwangdong beat DRX. But the LCK has gotten to the point where they don't even want that matchup of Aphelios against Jinx because they know that it's not a good matchup. So they prefer putting Xayah into Jinx, but the Xayah into Jinx is 2-5. So Jinx, again, 5-2 against Xayah. Aphelios was 5-4 against the LEC, but they were 2-4 before Rogue 3-0'd the matchup. And again, that has a lot to do with playstyle and basically, yeah, like that's a playstyle thing. You can win both sides of the matchup. It was unlikely for them to win 3 in a row in that matchup, in my opinion. But credit to Rogue, they played that really well, and the playmaking upside of Aphelios and setting up mid-game skirmishes with the utility that he offers in his kit is kind of the reason. It was a contributing factor in their wins. And then Jinx was 1-0 against Aphelios in the LCS. And then overall in playoffs, Jinx was 6-11 in the playoffs, which is surprising. So that might have something to do with the LPL teams are better at playing the early game, punishing the early game. In the LCK, Jinx was 7-2, so obviously a very strong champion, and they do play somewhat more reserved. I know that the number of kills has been increasing, especially when T1 is the one playing Jinx, and T1 is one of the best Jinx teams in the world. So at MSI, we'll get back into this mentality, depending on what patch they're playing on. Is Jinx the most important AD carry for T1 still? And if it is, how are other teams going to approach it? Because if they play the Xayah against it, or if they play the Aphelios against it, you're either going to have to play super aggressive or hope that you can poke them out in the late game with the other laners coming to the rescue of your bot lane. In the LEC, Jinx is 5-8 overall, so I think that part of that again has to do with teams the lesser teams are the ones that more generally want to scale because it gives them a fighting chance against the better team that's generally more aggressive. But it just hasn't worked out in the LEC so far. And then in the LCS, Jinx is 2-1. And I'm not sure what percentage of the time she's been banned and stuff like that. That's not what I was looking at. But let's go back to the bets. So Vitality was first up. I lost that one. OMG, I lost that one. They didn't even make playoffs. But that was $20 to win $1,000. So I kind of expected to lose that one. All I'm trying to do is get as many teams in the playoffs as possible in the LPL at good numbers. And then Ultra Prime plus 4,000. So another team. I like both of those teams for the summer split. I think that if those odds are anywhere close to that, I'd probably want to bet that again. Because, again, I want to get as many teams far along in the playoffs as possible. JDG, they're still alive. I have $20 to win 680. That was at plus 3,300. FPX I lost. FPX was kind of like a fear of missing out bet. I shouldn't have bet that one. And I kind of just did it because I was afraid of not betting on them. V5, they're still in there. So I have 2 out of the final 4 teams. V5 is plus 220. Let's go back to the full cam and I'll bring up the rest of the matches. Weibo Gaming, so they had a pretty good run in playoffs. Unfortunately, they didn't make it to the double elimination. So that one's over. In the LCK, my only bet was DRX, and they lost to Kwangdong, which was upsetting. Billy Gaming, plus 700. Again, that was more of a fear of missing out bet. At plus 700, that was probably just a bad bet, and I'm okay admitting that. CLG to win the LCS, plus 20,000. They did look a lot better at the end of playoffs. I also had a CLG bet for them to make playoffs, and they didn't make playoffs, so I lost that. And with futures, you're going to lose most of them, so that's fine. Dignitas plus 4,000 to win the playoffs. That lost. TSM plus 1,200. That was a bad one. That's on me. And then I have 2 more teams that are alive in the LCS. I have 100 Thieves at plus 600, so $50 to win 350. And Evil Geniuses, $50 to win 325. So I got my money in on Evil Geniuses at probably the worst time, right after the lock-in stuff at the beginning of the season. I expected them to play really well throughout the year, so I didn't want to miss out on the 550 because I thought it may have gotten worse. But as the season went on, I didn't really look for a chance to double down because it does seem unlikely at this point, especially now that they're in the losers bracket. So let's go back to this. So the remaining matches in the LPL. Next up, we have V5 against Top Esports. That's happening 4 days from now, and we have RNG against JDG. So I'm probably just going to let it ride at this point. If one of those two teams wins, I should win money for my LPL bets. I still have a chance at... I don't have a chance at the LEC. So Fnatic and G2 are playing 5 days from now. And then in the LCS, we have another 5-day wait. C9 against Golden Guardians, Evil Geniuses against FlyQuest, Team Liquid against 100 Thieves. So let me get back. Let's talk about EG real quick, because it's really talking about EG and Vitality. So I feel kind of weird talking about Evil Geniuses because I'm a huge fan of Evil Geniuses. I like hyped them up before the season started, before lock-in. I believe in their long-term talent, and I don't want this to come across as super negative, but it is necessarily negative. So this is where it kind of comes down to the drafting, because some of their drafts just, in my opinion, were not good, and these are mistakes that I don't even know if I should call them mistakes, but they are limitations of the draft that we see throughout the world. And I don't necessarily have statistics from professional matches that kind of point towards what I'm trying to get at, because I'm coming at it from a theory perspective, and the theoretical limitations of some of these champions are just too much. They're not something that's going to show itself. It's not going to show itself in the small sample size of actual professional games, because there are so many item combinations, champion combinations that the league or the League of Legends community in general just doesn't appreciate until one very good player that's like a challenger or a professional player takes the risk of looking stupid on stage, and it ends up becoming the best thing. And everybody always points to the Ardent Sensor meta. I was on the Ardent Sensor meta months before that became popular, and it's all because of gold efficiency and stuff like that. I'm not saying every time that somebody creates an advantage it's from gold and stuff like that, but it is one of the ways that it has happened in the past. So with these drafts specifically, let's talk about some of the limitations of some of these champions and why it's frustrating to bet on a team like Evil Geniuses, who has a very talented group of players, and we believe in their talent long term, but the drafting might scare us away from them in the future. So let's talk about Gnar. Gnar is a conditional engage champion. Gnar is good in the laning phase, but Gnar is not going to win lane hard enough most of the time if both sides are playing correctly. Gnar isn't going to win big enough to win the game on his own. Gnar is going to generally go even, maybe get a couple of turret plates in a matchup like this against Ornn, but you're never really going to punish the Ornn enough to make him irrelevant, because he gets 1,000 every time that he levels up and can upgrade somebody else's item. That's worth between 500 to 1,000 gold, depending on how efficiently the other champion can use that item. So with Gnar, whenever we see Gnar getting picked and it's one of the only engage options on the team or the primary engage option on the team, you need to remember Gnar is only a conditional engage, because Gnar's ability to engage is dependent on managing his rage. When Gnar is in a losing matchup or their team is losing in general, it's more difficult for the Gnar to stack up the rage bar if they are losing. So it's a tempo champion. You need to be winning. Well, you don't need to be winning. You will be more successful if you are winning already as the Gnar, because it will allow you to engage. Whereas if you're in a losing position, there are a lot of times where you have no control over your rage bar, you get to a team fight, and you're mini Gnar for the entire time. And if you're the only engaged champion that you're supposed to have, your team is completely screwed. So that's one that I'm pretty critical of. We talk about that in the videos every once in a while, or at least in Discord, where I complain about Gnar. I like Gnar. Gnar's a fun champion to play in solo queue. I think that it's a little bit overplayed in the pro scene. if it's a secondary form of engage, or if you have a Leona, you have a Nautilus, or like a big engage champion from the jungle or mid lane, or if you have a utility AD carry, these are all things that supplement your engage and allow the Nard to play the game better. Next up, Lee Sin. I'm not as anti Lee Sin as a lot of other people, and the reason is because I've played with very good Lee Sin players, and having a Lee Sin on your team makes you feel like you always have a chance to flip for a dragon, flip for a baron, steal an objective, like gank in the early game, get stuff done in the early game, and potentially snowball a game. And I do think that you want to have some of that in your team, but you need to understand like what you're up against. Like if I'm going against a Jinx, I'm less happy to have a Lee Sin, because Lee Sin is going to fall off from a gold efficiency perspective, and he will always have the playmaking upside. But at some point, if the Jinx gets too far ahead, you're just a reset for the Jinx, and you're not really going to be able to do a lot. You're going to create a lot of pressure as the Lee Sin, but it's a little bit more difficult to play the Lee Sin. I think Inspired's a very good Lee Sin player, and that's why I don't mind them playing it. It's just the story that you're telling with the draft needs to take the meta into consideration, take the enemy team into consideration, and then be able to play around your win conditions that you're drafting. So Lee Sin, I think if it's the kind of champion that you're just going to blind pick or play into any matchup, that's fine, as long as you have other engage options and the ability to follow up him going deep. So I don't really have a huge problem with the Lee Sin, but I know that there are limitations to Lee Sin as a champion in terms of gold efficiency. Akali. So Akali, there are a lot of really tough matchups for Akali in the mid lane, just because she gets outranged. So if you don't have lane priority mid lane, top lane, or bot lane, your jungler is going to get screwed. And a lot of the times that's what happens to Akali, is like, your team isn't able to create enough pressure or force fights in the mid game to get the Akali snowballing. When Akali gets snowballing, she's an amazing champion. Then in the bot lane, we had the Yuumi and the Xayah, and this is in my mind, it's bad for a couple of reasons. First of all, Xayah against the Jinx. I'll take the Jinx side of that matchup every single day. Like in my mind, it's like Jinx is the pocket aces, and Xayah is like suited, like ace king suited or something like that. It's like, yes, it's a good hand, but it's not pocket aces. And you will win sometimes, but you're not the side that's more likely to win, especially when you have somebody like Yuumi. So in this game, they had to blow like flash level 1, and then it's like impossible for the Xayah to play the laning phase, because now you have to constantly be afraid of Tahm Kench coming in and knocking you up again, and you'll just die. And I think that during this game, you saw that there were a lot of moments where Danny and Vulcan showed that they understood the matchup, and they were like good at playing the matchup, but that playing on the knife's edge and losing that one trade at level 1 kind of screwed the entire laning phase for them, where they couldn't be the ones aggressing onto the Jinx and exploiting that champion, which makes me question, why are you the blue team with a very good Jinx record and you just give it up to Team Liquid? So it's possible that in their scrims against Team Liquid, or their scrims against somebody else, maybe they were having a lot of trouble drafting Jinx on blue side and being able to win the game. But you need to, in my opinion, you need to realize like your opinions about the game itself should be more important than those couple of games that you've been playing in scrims. And it's tough to kind of separate those two things out. But I feel like any team that doesn't prioritize Jinx in this meta right now is kind of telling you that they don't, I don't want to say understand, but they just have the wrong read on the situation. And, some people will probably disagree with me on that, and that's fine. It's just, it's so much easier when you have that kind of guiding principle as the first thing. Like in my mind, Jinx is the most important champion. If you're red side, ban it. If you're blue side, first pick it. And if I pick it blue 1 and you counter it somehow and you beat me, then fine. But that's how you have to start the matchup. You need to have Team Liquid prove that they can beat the Jinx in that first game. And it's just a better drafting thing, because there's a bunch of ambulances or something. But let's just move on to game 2. So game 2, we had Graves, Graves is an okay champion, but there's a lot of times where he just doesn't do anything in the late game. It's a lot better against Aphelios, and I think that it's a lane dominant champion where, well, not that really dominant. You're able to farm, you're able to do your job a lot of the times, but he often doesn't like do anything in the late game. I know he went 6-3-7 in this game, which is pretty good, but he's a much stronger champion when he's also up against like an Aphelios, because he makes the ranged limitations of Aphelios felt even more because of like the smoke bomb and stuff like that. Lee Sin, we already talked about Lee Sin. Rise is a very good champion right now because of his itemization, and he still pumps out a lot of damage. He gives you the utility, the movement around the map, the team movement around the map. That's a very important thing in this in like League of Legends right now. It's very beneficial. And then we have the utility AD carries, and you'll notice like Eclipse, Muramana, Cyrilda's Grudge. It's a very popular combination, and the reason why it's such a popular combination is because they all work really well together, and it's good on the caster AD carries. So it's really like the caster style AD carries versus the more gold efficient, like better scaling AD carries in Jinx and Aphelios. Like you can just tell by the way that they're itemizing that they're different styles of champions. But Misfortune, especially in a game where Jinx is banned out, like the Misfortune, if it's good enough against Xayah, I think you're not supposed to win the Xayah matchup. I think Xayah is supposed to win that against Misfortune. But like it blocks off the Aphelios because you don't really want to play Aphelios into Misfortune. The laning phase is going to be tough. Let's keep going. This game was a little upsetting for me. I think that Evil Geniuses did a good job drafting in game 3. It just didn't work out. Like playing the Nocturne looks bad when it goes wrong, but they were able to build up that lead. And if it wasn't for a very timely exhaust in like a mid-game team fight, I think the Evil Geniuses would have just like steamrolled this game. But it didn't end up that way. And obviously, they had the Jinx in this one that lost. But Kennen's a fine champion. You get to the late game, and like if I'm gonna have a champion that does one thing, I hope it's as good as Kennen's one thing, because Kennen's one thing is I'm going to teleport in, flash into your team, and if all 5 of you are anywhere near each other, all 5 of you are going to eat all of my damage, so it's either exhaust me or somebody's going to die, which is very good. The Nocturne, again, a little one-dimensional, but it was working until that team fight where Team Liquid kind of got way too much out of it. And there were really 2 things that happened. So there was like a dragon fight where somebody got caught out around red buff, and then it turned into a dragon. It turned into a team fight loss, and then there was like a Rift Herald fight and a Rift Herald loss. And the game just kind of went out of control from there. And again, I don't think that was a draft problem. I think that's just kind of how it played out, and that's fine. Bjergsen did look pretty good at Ahri, but Ahri's another champion that has a lot of limitations, and I think it's being like overvalued right now. It's good because it gives you the additional like utility pick ability. But like that damage profile for that team, if you don't start snowballing, I think that you're going to lose most games. So I do prefer Evil Genius's draft there. Game 4, this game, there's 2 things really. So the draft was pretty good. You have the engage from Leona and like Rise kind of. But then you also have 3 very good damage dealers in Ezreal, Lucian, and Graves. And the best part about this draft, and this is another thing that I've been talking about for years, actually talking about it for years, is having an aggressive solo laner and a passive solo laner. So Jojo Pyun is someone who can be that aggressive laner and always push the envelope, always try to get an advantage in the laning phase and like just dominate a lane. You should be willing to move that from top to mid lane depending on the matchup and the players that you're playing against. You should put Jojo Pyun in the most advantageous matchup every single time. That does require a lot from your offlaner. So Impact in this situation played Rise. He played it well enough. And again, that's the beautiful thing about League of Legends is like Impact on his best champion as opposed to Impact on his 10th best champion. Like there is a difference there. He's not as good at his 10th best champion. But if that allows your team to draft more easily and get Jojo Pyun into an advantageous position, he can exploit a draft because he's willing to be aggressive. He's willing to put the team on his back. Danny played very well in this game too. And this is the kind of stuff that you'll watch where it's like, wow, Danny is such a good player. He's so mechanically gifted. There are some decision-making problems that he runs into every once in a while, but that happens to everybody. So it's tough to be too critical. Like in that previous game, like there was a point where like he had a chance to flash forward and then like get a kill and maybe get a reset and do something, and it just didn't work out because like right when he flashed, he got exhausted. But like stuff happens. Like you're never going to play the game perfectly, and I'm not asking them to play perfectly. I'm just asking them to draft better. And then in the fifth game, you had an okay first part of the draft. You had the rise of Felios Leona, and then on 4-5 they picked Renekton Nidalee, and every single person that was watching the game was like, oh my god, what are you doing? Renekton Nidalee, you're going to fall off a cliff. You're not good. You have to get like this gigantic advantage in the early game, and then eventually Sion was like killing Renekton one-on-one, and it was a huge mess. And they also gave up the Jinx side of the matchup. So like you would have been much better off if you had the Jinx on Evil Genius's side, because you could take that early game advantage and then use that to pile on top of your winning bot lane matchup. But everything went wrong in game 5. That was just not a very good draft from the perspective of like, when you fail in this way in game 5, everyone's going to question you. Everyone's going to have a problem with it. And like, that's why, you know, if this was game 5, Evil Genius first picks Jinx, and then Team Liquid responds with like some good counter, like I would just feel better. I'd be able to sleep at night knowing I put my team on one of the most powerful broken champions in the game, and the other team just outdrafted me. Like that'd be fine. But in this situation, it was like we had a pretty good draft, and they were like building a team that was going to scale like just as good, if not better than us. So we decided to go all in on the early game. Well, if you were going to all in on the early game, you shouldn't have picked Ryze and Aphelios. So it was just kind of super annoying to watch. I was kind of annoyed when I was watching it live, and that's kind of why I went on the Jinx and Aphelios tangent on Twitter, because like G2 did it and it failed, Evil Geniuses did it and it failed. Like all these teams do a lot of the same stuff where it just fails, and it's like if your opinion is like, because this is coming from my perspective, if I think that Jinx is the best champion in the game and I lose the game when I first picked Jinx blue side, it doesn't mean that Jinx isn't the best champion in the game. It means that my team didn't draft around it the right way, or we didn't play around it the right way. And even if you do both of those things, there's still a % chance that you lose. But you need to be consistent. You need to continuously play towards that percentage. If you get pocket aces 5 hands in a row, you're not going to fold pocket aces pre-flop the third or fourth time that you get it just because you lost the first 2 times. You just need to trust that over time your correct drafting is going to put you in a position to succeed. And a lot of the times it feels like teams just don't do that, and they move around too much. Like you need to have your go-to drafts from blue side, go-to draft from red side, and all your responses for blue and red, depending on what champions are picked. And like this is their full-time job. They have way too much time to prepare for drafts to have this be the result. And maybe that's not fair. But you know, I've coached teams before, not at this level, not with this much on the line, but I've coached teams where I know that I can get my players into positions that give them the best chances to succeed. Maybe it's not what everyone else would do, but at the end of the day, I know that my players were in a good enough spot for them. And sometimes the other team is just better than you, and that's fine. But there's no way that you can tell me Evil Geniuses can't play Jinx, and they weren't prepared to play Jinx. They were like 7-1 on Jinx this split. So that's basically it. I know that was a little bit of a long tangent, but I wanted to give an update on like my futures bets and talk a little bit about the matches that have happened and the matches that are happening next weekend. The Masters is this weekend, so that'll be a lot of fun to watch as well. But that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.